Well, good evening and welcome to Copperfield's Books virtual event with Michael Sayman. My name is Jamie Madsen. I'm the marketing and events coordinator here, and I will also be your host for the evening. So just a couple of things to note before we get started tonight. If you go ahead and keep an eye on your chat box, I will be using this during the event to provide details for purchasing tonight's title, a discount code, links for other Copperfields events, and the like. So just keep an eye out there. And additionally, the format will feature between 35 to 45 minutes of speaking and will then be followed by a live Q&A. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen in the right corner, you'll see an icon that says Q&A. Please go ahead and submit your questions and comments here rather than replying to my post in the chat box. And now I'm really excited to introduce tonight's author, Michael Sayman. A teen entrepreneur, a programmer, and student, Michael created an iOS app development company at the age of 13 after teaching himself to code. Since then, he has gone on to create dozens of apps which have been downloaded more than 3 million times worldwide. And he's with us tonight to discuss his brand new debut, also memoir, App Kid, How a Child of Immigrants Grabbed a Piece of the American Dream. So welcome, Michael. How are you doing tonight?
Good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Oh, we're thrilled. And yes, it's a little bit late over there in Miami, but thanks for, hanging in there. I want to go ahead and dive in. Is that all right?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So first and foremost, what led you to start coding at such a young age, and you taught yourself how to do it? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I grew up in this internet age, right, where we had access to the computers and the internet since I was a kid, since I could remember, right? And so Google came out, I think, when I was born. So the
Wow.
entire internet and how that works has just been a part of my life since I can remember. Um, and I got started right away playing all kinds of video games when I was a kid. Naturally, the first question I asked myself was, could I make a game myself? And obviously the answer was no. But I didn't know that, right? I thought I could. And really it was through Google and through just Googling how to make a game that I realized I needed to know how to speak the language of a computer. And I didn't entirely know what coding was as I was learning how to do it. I just simply was following instructions on the internet on how to build my own games that led me to building one and then realizing, I guess this is coding. And so it
Wow.
really did start like that for me.
That is, I'm just picturing myself in 8th grade thinking, what a feat. Well, a lot of parents worry that their kids spend way too much time online. So in your case, it led to a very successful career. So what do you have to say to those that worry about you?
Well, I think, my parents were concerned about how much time I was spending on the internet naturally. I think the
Right.
amount of time that it took me to build my own game was quite a lot of time on Google looking things up. I talk about it now as like, oh, I simply Googled it and no problem. But the reality is, it was a lot of time. There were a lot of steps to take and a lot for me to learn. I was so passionate about it that I continue to do it all the time. But the reality is, there is too much time to spend on the internet. As I write in the book, I think it got me to the point where I became overweight. My physical health wasn't very good. My mental health deteriorated over time just because of like the amount of effort I had to put into just making these apps function. I think there's a balance that you can strike with kids around allowing them to use the computer and the internet to learn how to build things, but at the same time, making sure that they're still able to move and be active in the real world. Because unfortunately, for us in the tech industry, our bodies are still in the physical world. So we need to make sure to take care of them. And if you don't do that, there is no internet to enjoy, right?
Right. You got to find the happy medium. And I guess it's
Yes.
probably different for everyone.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to shift gears. You wound up supporting your family at a young age. What was that like for you? And how tricky was it to still be the kid, but also in charge of your family's financials?
It was actually really hard. I didn't realize how hard it was until later on in my life as I started to notice the effect that it had on me. So when I was a kid, I was around 13, 14 when my parents had lost their business and they didn't have any money left. So I started to use the money I was earning from my apps to pay for the bills.
Wow.
It was hard because I think in the book you kind of start to get to this point where you wonder, was this a decision that this kid made for himself, or was this just a decision that was forced upon him to do with the money from his apps? At
Right.
which point I felt tremendous pressure to build apps that made money. And so you can imagine the amount of time I spent on my computer went from a lot to a lot.
Okay, just
And
give me a
yeah,
ballpark during one day. How many
so I would
hours?
come, yeah, I would be at least maybe like eight hours on top of the 8 hours I'd spend at school. So I would come home from school, spending all day, trying to work on these apps to, as soon as I get to the house, just start working. I'd go to sleep at 3 in the morning. I'd wake up every day super late to school. It affected everything in my life, and it was extremely challenging. Mostly I think in the family dynamic, my parents didn't know how to interact with me. I didn't know how to interact with my parents. How do you tell a kid no, or how do you raise a kid when the kid is in control of all of the finances and decisions? If a kid wants to go on the vacation and he has the money to do it, does he take the family on the trip? If you as a parent want to take your family on vacation, do you ask the kid if they can go, or do you just do it yourself and take the money and spend it? Or how do you go about that process? So that was a challenging situation. And for school, my grades collapsed. My attention in school was basically nothing, and every day I'd go into school and just ask my friends if I could copy their homework, because I just didn't know what was going on. Even with tests, I tried to cheat my way through. It was a disaster, to be honest. And so there were trade-offs. No story is perfect, but at the same time as this was happening with me, I ended up being able to travel all over South America, talking about my book and talking, well, not about my book really, but my apps.
Now your book.
Well, I guess now my book, but talking about my apps and talking about my career and talking about like how I'm able to build these things and having people all over the world asking me how to make apps too and how to help their families was crazy. It was this weird double life I was living.
That is so intriguing. I'm, very fascinated by that. And so things start to come together for you. And I certainly remember this, but you went to work for Facebook at 17 and you ran a team of your own. Can you
Yes.
tell us a little bit about that experience and kind of how you got into Facebook? I think you were kind of helping for the prototype of Instagram. I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I was actually in high school when I got an email from Facebook saying that Mark Zuckerberg wanted to meet with me. It was the strangest thing in the world. I couldn't imagine any of it, and naturally I was like stressing out about how much money the apps were making at the time so that I could, we could pay for things. And I hadn't gotten into any of the colleges that I applied to, and I was very scared about that. And naturally, like, this just comes in and I don't know what to do, right? I'm like, is
Right.
this first? I think it's fake, right? First I'm like, okay, someone's trying to scam me. Like, there's no way that's a real email. And so I verified the email. Once I did that, I immediately wanted to fly out and meet with him. And the first thing my mom said was, I don't know who Mark Zuckerberg is. She's from Peru, right? And she's been here. She's like, I don't know who he is. And you're not going across the country to any state, no, certainly not California, across the country by yourself. You're 16. What do you think? I'm going to just let you go because you got an email from someone you think is important? Mom
Logical.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, I had to tell her to Google him and everything. So she did that. And then she said, okay, I'll let you go if I go too. Right. And so I said, okay, so I'm going to ask them. So I go ask Mark Zuckerberg's assistant if I can have my mom come too. And they said, yeah, sure, no problem. Like, we'll get one ticket for you and your mom. And so They paid for our flights over. I got to meet with him, my mom there too, and of course, my mom being super awkward, asking for pictures and things, and Zuckerberg understanding that, that's moms are moms, right? And
Right.
that's kind of how that whole thing started for me. The reason that he reached out was actually because some of the apps that I was building were getting millions of users to download it. And that got the apps that I was building to the top charts. One of the word games that I made at one point reached the number one word game on the App Store for a while. So it was one of those things where like, I was struggling at home personally, trying to figure out the financial aspect of what I was doing. And then I couldn't have been appearing to be more successful from the outside. And so I just got very lucky with the Zuckerberg situation. And I took that into my own hands and decided to tell my mom at that point that I did not want to go to college, that I just wanted to go and work at Facebook. And my mom was really scared about it. But at that point, I think I was, paying for the finances for a few years already at the house. And I didn't get into any of the colleges that I wanted to get into because of my grades were very bad. And so my mom did what she was doing for the past few years, and she decided to just kind of trust my instincts and let me explore the way I wanted to, which I'm really grateful for, because if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have been able to achieve what I did later when I joined Facebook.
Right. Such a compelling story. Well, you pretty much became Facebook's lead educator on teens. How did that come about? And
So yeah,
sorry.
so I was the youngest software engineer at Facebook at the time, and it was, it was different. I I felt like I was starting at college in some ways. I also felt like I had just been adopted by a new corporate family. Like like it was a mix of the two. I learned how to communicate with people, and I really was raised by a conglomerate multinational corporation. It's the weirdest thing you could imagine, where 50 different product directors and managers are essentially teaching me how to drink wine, how to, wash my own clothes, like how to cook, how to do all these things that I didn't know how to do. And of course, naturally, I also had to perform at my job. So I needed to find a way to have an impact within the company. And I thought there was no better way than um, to try and educate the company about my generation, because frankly I felt like my entire company at Facebook had no idea what people my age were interested in, because none of us were using Facebook. We were on Snapchat, and the
So
company
how
was,
did you do that?
yeah, so I just started talking about it. Was it was actually pretty easy at the time, I felt, where I just started taking pictures of my home screen and my friends' home screens and showing how Instagram and Facebook were either deleted or in the back of the phone, and Snapchat was front and center, and just started to highlight that. I would do I decided to do some talks within the company where people could come in and hear the perspective of a teenager. So I called them teen talks, and I would just start every month with a quiz for the audience, where I would basically just do like pop culture questions around famous celebrities or Viners at the time, popular Vine stars, and no one knew any of them. So it was a really great way of starting a process within the company for people to realize how much was still to learn about the demographic, which then led me to pitching Zuckerberg and the executive team at Facebook around building a team focused on understanding the demographic, which Chris Cox, who was the chief product officer at the time, convinced Zuckerberg to let me do. And so within a few months of joining Facebook, I started recruiting engineers and designers to join my own team, to start
Wow.
working on the teenage demographic and figuring out how we could get Instagram and Facebook to bring back the younger audience.
And that is beyond. I mean,
It was weird for sure.
yeah, I'm just wow. So maybe what were your favorite things about working at Facebook, and maybe what were the best and what were the hardest times?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously I think there's something to ask around like the lengths at which a company is willing to go to understand a demographic and what they're able to do with that, right? And how I was able at the time to have that kind of impact within the company. I quickly turned into a product manager myself, was no longer coding and just started leading these teams. I spent time every month meeting with Zuckerberg and the executive team to give them updates on the progress that we were making on some of the projects that we were building. I started trying to come up with ways to build out new features. And separately, I actually started teaching Zuckerberg how to use Snapchat, which was kind of fun. And also a little weird because we wanted to understand the product and I felt like it was important to do so. At that point, then I started strategizing with him around how we might be able to bring stories to Instagram and WhatsApp and Facebook. These were things I never expected would be my life, but I just kind of took them and ran with it. I guess my description of what I thought were some of the best moments were realizing that a company as massive and as powerful as Facebook was able to kind of, I don't know if the word is humble itself, but at least the CEO was able to bring himself out of his position and decide to listen to this like random teenager at his company because he felt like he needed to learn more about a demographic he wasn't a part of. That to me felt special, right? Like that to me felt different, especially knowing that like English is my second language and my family coming from Peru, like they, they didn't have any reason to listen to me. And I thought, right, like there was nothing to listen there, but they chose to, and he chose to. And I felt like that was different. That was different from a company. And it shows in terms of the products that they build and the success that they have in that the CEO is really concerned with trying to understand people at the top of everything else. I think the challenge for me was always understanding the balance between what a company is and what a family is. Because the reality is, Facebook is not a family, it's a company. And
Mhm.
it has its incentives as a company to profit and to make a business successful, right? And in that process, they've been able to build a company that feels amazing to work at. They wash my clothes, they would uh, feed me breakfast, lunch, dinner. They paid my rent for a while. They did so much for me that it almost felt like I was a retired Gen Z slash millennial kid. Like it was weird. It was and so you end up blurring the line between family and company in a sense. And I think the challenge for me in that was reminding myself that despite the fact that I learned so much from the people there, and a lot of them were basically like my parents in many cases, that it was still a company and I was being raised by a company, right? So I had to remember that and keep that in mind.
That is so fascinating. Yeah, it's like you said, you almost came of age and grew up with people, through the water cooler talk and things. And then you're
Yeah.
also learning all these valuable life lessons about what the workplace is supposed to be. Just wow. Um, so the next venture you had, you left to go to Google. What
Yeah.
prompted that change?
Well, so the biggest thing for me has always been about trying to learn what the world is like, learn about how things work. And I got to a point when I was at Facebook after 4 years or so, where I realized all I know about the corporate world, all I know about the business world, all I know about how companies work is Facebook. I know nothing else. And I asked myself, is this it for me in terms of, is this the end of my context or my ability to understand the world in that lens? And I told myself I didn't want that, right? And so I started thinking about what I could do next. And funny enough, someone from Facebook, or someone who I knew through Facebook, um, ended up reaching out to me that they were working on virtual reality at Google, and they asked me if I wanted to go work with them on that. And so I decided to go ahead and jump into the company and do that as a bit of a risk, but also a strategic move for me financially. I talk in the book about how I made the decision to do that, and also how I managed to negotiate doubling my salary at the time to
Wow.
Google, which was crazy. But I I took a lot of risk back then, and I said a lot of things on phone calls with, with high ups at these companies that, looking back on it now, I thought was brilliant, but I had no idea what I was doing. So it was also like an accidental brilliance in that sense, which I could never repeat today, but it's okay. I'm just going to be grateful for it. Um, and then from there, I started to realize, wow, there can be a really different company culture. Within Google, people didn't ask me about how, oh, well, yes, they could have said no, and they could have said so many other things to me, right? But at the same time, I think the biggest challenge for me with all of that was uh, how how to navigate the world within Google, that was so much more businessy than Facebook. They didn't
Really?
treat me like family at all. The company was definitely one where it was about work in the workplace, and so I was used to making all of my friends and personal relationships within the company because I didn't know that that was how it didn't work, right? That was all I knew. And so when I got to Google and I would ask someone about their weekend, they would tell me it was good, thanks, and yours. And I was supposed to say, it was good, thanks for asking, and be done with it. That was really weird for me. And so I thought, okay, well, now I got to go find friends in the real world. How do I do that? And I tried Googling it, of course, and that didn't work out, right? But anyway, that's essentially my transition to Google. And then from there, I learned quite a bit within the company and the struggles that I had within it to just kind of learn how to kind of do my own thing. I've always been on my own in many ways, and when I build apps, I've always tried to do it to the beat of my own drum, I guess. And within Google, there were structures that kind of wanted me to do it a certain way, and so I tried to find a way to kind of squeeze out or carve out my little team, and I started a division within Google focused on social gaming products, and that's kind of where I got to start my own little team within Google as well, building out different features and helping products like YouTube build out their latest shorts feature that came out recently to compete against TikTok and so on. And so that's been a pretty interesting time.
Wow, that sounds completely fascinating. And so how long were you there?
I was there for about 4 years as well.
Oh,
And then just about last year, I decided to make a jump, actually right as the pandemic had hit, to Roblox, which was the craziest, I think, of all the decisions because, I didn't know what Roblox was for the longest time, but this is the gaming platform for kids all over the world right now. And I could not have been more excited about joining the company.
oh, we're getting Laura is commenting her students love Roblox.
Yeah, it's incredible. I think the moment I realized that there was something big here was, so I actually, being in Florida, I loved going to Disney World as a kid. And so my family and I would always go to Disney World and we enjoyed it. And so I think I went once, I want to say maybe a year and a half ago, with my family. And I remember as we go, I always try to take it as a research session. So I try to look at what all the kids are doing or like what phone people are using to take pictures of the fireworks to understand, do they have an iPhone? Do they not? What app are they using to take the picture? Right. And so I decided to do that. And I realized all of the children in the theme park were on an iPad. They weren't watching the fireworks. They weren't enjoying. They were on an iPad. And not only were they on an iPad, they were all playing the same game, like all the children in the park. And as at that point I thought, okay, what is this? And they're all like, oh, it's Roblox, it's the newest thing, all the kids are playing this, it's like their world. And I remember back to my days when I started coding, it was because I was building games of my own, and I was making these games, loving it, enjoying my life on the internet, and realizing at that point that these kids have a platform now that not only can they play these games, but Roblox allows them to build their own games and potentially make money off of the games that they make. And so I thought, okay, well, that's a huge opportunity for me to jump in and maybe try and go full circle on this and help other kids around the world build their own games and make their own money and start their careers in something that they're passionate in.
That's so inspiring. It went full circle almost, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Oh gosh, that's so great. Okay, so now we're going to take another little turn. As a Latinx man, you're among the minority in Silicon Valley. What challenges has that posed for you, and why do you think companies need to continue to work on their diversity?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest challenge was always like finding people who were similar or who came from similar backgrounds. I think in communication, there was always a challenge for me because, culturally, I think Latinos, we just like have a certain way of talking or a certain way of being. Sometimes it can be loud, sometimes we're overly emotional, like that, like at least I am. So I know like whenever I would have conversations with people, I wouldn't know if I was being too forward or too loud or not loud enough, right? Like there were always these questions that I had. And so I would try and form little groups. And being Peruvian, I wanted to find all the Peruvians within Facebook when I was there. I remember we were maybe like 13,000 employees. And our group, we wanted to make a Facebook group for Peruvians. It wasn't big enough. We didn't have enough people to make a Facebook group. We were just five. We were just five Peruvians in a 13,000 person company within Silicon Valley that has a huge population of Hispanic people. And so we just had to make a group chat. So we just made a little chat group, started talking within there. Of the five of us, only me and one other person were engineers at the company. So there were two Peruvian engineers out of 13,000 people. And within the entire company, only 3% of us were Hispanic. So it was very, very little amount of people that were Hispanic compared to the almost 30% of Hispanics that lived surrounding the campus. And so we asked ourselves, why is that the case? And the reality is the entire family in the Hispanic community isn't exposed to the internet the way that other families were. Ever since growing up, Hispanic families have had less access to the internet, less access to computers and those resources. So the parents have never really been exposed to the idea that engineering and computers could be a career for their kids. This obviously leads to the famous thing where all the Hispanic parents are always asking their kids to either become a doctor or a lawyer. And if you don't do one or the other, like, what are you doing? Right. So that was naturally a question for me too. And my parents had to discover over time that what I did was actually a career, but they took a risk with that. Most Hispanic parents that don't want to risk the careers of their kids would never dare allow their kid to play the video games to see if they're going to become something out of it. Right. And so that, along with a whole lot of other issues, resulted in such a low number of Hispanic people in these companies. And I think that was a pretty big challenge for me was I didn't worry too much about the struggles of what it was like to be Hispanic there. I worried more about how can we make this change? How can we make sure that in the next 5 to 10 years, this is not the situation, that I don't just have a group chat with like one other engineer that's Peruvian and we have a tiny 5 person group chat in a 13,000 person company, right? How do we change that, right? And figuring out how to do it. So, we'd go around to the community. I'd spend time with kids in some of the Hispanic schools around the Bay Area, trying to explain to the parents about the industry and what is possible there. And to this day, I think what I try to do with my story is at least highlight that it doesn't take a genius to do what I did. It just takes someone with motivation. And I think the Hispanic community has plenty of that.
Well said. And I wanted to note, I was reading about you, and it says in 2019 you were described as the most influential Latino in Silicon Valley, which I found really awesome. So I figured I'd share that. Okay, next. So I love this concept. You call the under 25s the anyone can generation. Tell
Yes.
us what you mean by that.
Yes. So essentially, what I mean by this is that um, I grew up in an era, and people my age grew up in an era where they have seen people who come from all backgrounds go on the internet, make a name for themselves, and change the world, the entire landscape, whether it's through creating videos on TikTok or YouTube or building their own apps and games. Our generation is used to knowing that anyone can really become anything if they choose to. All of the major celebrities and influencers that people know of today in my generation came from just going on the internet and shooting videos or building their own things on their own or their own brands or deciding to take on careers of their own because they wanted to and nobody told them that they couldn't. And so I think there's a belief within my generation that any one of us can do whatever we want and can become famous. The most striking statistic for me was when I looked at the number one career that people and kids in high school and middle school today want to be. It used to be astronaut, it used to be president. The number one thing people want to be now is YouTuber, video game streamer, app developer. And so we start to see these things come up now, and we realize uh, the whole world has changed. This is not something that happened before. And so that's why I call it anyone can generation, because it goes down to every little detail of the apps that we use. Part of the reason why Snapchat became so popular with my generation was it literally looked like it was built by anyone. It didn't look like it was a professionally made app served to provide some function for people. It literally just looked like it was scrapped together for us by us. And so that's why we just started using it when we were kids. And that's really kind of the entire language. It goes from design into so many other aspects. And I just think it's fascinating to see where that's going to take us.
It's truly fascinating. Maddie says, my school has a new program and it's really cool how we get to film videos and see ourselves on the screen. It is wildly changing the world.
Yes, and now we're getting into the point where the financial industry as a whole is being taken on with this generation, where we see the ability for kids and people on the internet to monetize their content in ways that was never possible before. And so I think we're just continuously pushing and pushing to see how far does this anyone can concept really go. And it's fascinating to see the effects that it's having.
Really, really exciting. So you kind of touched on this, but I have to ask, what are you doing these days at Roblox?
Well, today, I think the biggest thing that I'm trying to do at Roblox is building out the platform so that kids can use the tools on Roblox to build their own experiences that other people can participate in. I think that's kind of the most incredible thing for me. And that's the most important thing that I kind of want to be able to do within the company. Separate to that, I also lead the product team regarding some of the social features and love building out some of the things that we've been starting to do, including voice chat and some of the events that we're getting started there and how to connect people, how to friend them. I love doing the job. I love working on it. And I love doing the research on it because that means I can travel all over and see how kids are playing and talk to them and get feedback on the product. So I love doing that at Roblox. At the same time, I always build my little apps on the side. I'm always tinkering with things on my computer, seeing what can work because my passion is always in building apps, and no matter how old I get, I'm always going to do it. And then of course now I guess I have this book, which is weird and crazy and exciting, and I mean we'll see if there's a movie or something. I don't know.
I was muted. I'm sorry. I was saying, wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah.
Wow. And you already got your memoir under your belt. I mean, life is exciting. So my kind of last real question is, what do you want people to take from this book? There's so many things, right?
Yeah. I think the biggest takeaway in my view is that it really doesn't take a genius to do what I did. I think you realize through all the mistakes I make along the way and the way that I think through every one of my decisions that um, it's a matter of just being determined and insisting and observant, right? You just need to be spending a lot of time trying to understand the people around you and the landscape that you're in. And if you just start asking questions and trying to figure out a way to get to a North Star and you're consistent about it, you can get there. It's kind of like going to the gym. If you go every day, eventually you know how to do what you're doing. And that was kind of what I was doing with my apps. And I really hope like what happens or what comes of this is that other kids feel empowered to be able to build their own apps and do their own thing. But I also think that the book is a bit of a lesson as to like how a family can be um, in many ways destroyed through the success of kids apps, right? And how a family can maybe overcome those struggles, and a warning to families out there who do explore this new world of anyone can make money however they want on the internet, that there's a lot of new untouched or unexplored areas of family dynamics that are going to start becoming more common as we see the internet age and the anyone can era take over our world. And you know how families can work with their kids as things kind of change in this direction.
I think it's such an inspirational message, and this has been such a compelling conversation. Before I ask you what you're doing next, let's open up the Q&A. I see we have a couple questions here, and people feel free to submit questions and comments still. We will get them. So Maddie has a question. What made you want to develop apps?
So I decided to make apps mostly because it was the only way I could make my games. I had gotten an iPhone, I remember, and I was so excited about the opportunity to play the games that I loved on my iPhone. But I knew that I couldn't just download the game that I love to play onto my phone. So I thought, well, I should try and make the game that I play on my computer. I should just recreate it and build it on my phone. A lot of these things that I would tell myself when I was a kid, looking back on it, sound kind of ridiculous, right? Like, who decides to just recreate the game that they play on their phone? That's just not something you would normally see someone ask. But I guess I was just naive enough to ask the types of questions that were necessary for me to uncover how to do this. And in time and with persistence, I actually discovered how to do it, and I did it. So that was how I decided I wanted to make apps. It really wasn't something that I set up before. It wasn't something that I thought would make money. It wasn't something that I thought would be a career. I just kind of wanted the games on my phone.
So what games are you playing right now?
Well, now, I mean, I've always been a Mario fan, so no matter
Ah,
what, I'm always going to be playing those Mario games since I was a kid.
solid.
Oh yeah, and then of course now I'm trying to learn how to use Roblox, which is an entirely other situation, which makes me feel so old, even
Oh
though
my
I'm
gosh.
25, and it's ridiculous. But that was definitely something that I think I started learning at the time, and now I'm trying to figure out how to use. Separate to that, it's always been a question of trying to find the next game that I love to play. Yeah, and I mean we'll see. I like making my own games and playing those too. So if I make my own games on the side and they tend to be fun for me, they usually don't tend to be fun for others. So I try to ask other people what their thoughts are, and with a combination of that and my own excitement, hopefully make another game that makes people have fun.
Yeah, with that determination and power, why not make your own games? Wow. Okay, our next question is from Laura. Are you familiar with sites where people can learn how to code? Do you think one is better than the other, like Khan Academy, Code Academy, and etc.?
Yes, yes. So I certainly am. As I was stumbling upon the internet, learning how to make these games and these apps, I realized that there were some websites that were really good and very useful. And then I realized that there were some apps and some websites that were not so useful. Code Academy, I thought, was pretty useful for me in the beginning to kind of learn some of the fundamental basics. But the reality, I think, of building and programming with code is that it's like so massive and there is so much to do with coding that you cannot learn all of it in any short amount of time. It would take me years to learn how to actually code. I did not how to code almost anything when I built my first app. The reality is that the only piece of code that I knew was the code that I used to make the specific app that I made. And if I wanted to change anything else about my app at the time, I would have had to learn how to code that because I didn't know. And so the approach that I took was actually to come up with a small idea first, something small that I could kind of work towards doing. So the first thing was like a tic-tac-toe game, and just Googling how to make a tic-tac-toe game on my phone. And that was it. And just learning how to do that, not trying to figure out the fundamentals of coding, not trying to figure out how anything else works other than just that. And at that point, I followed the steps and I knew nothing of what I was doing via YouTube. So YouTube, I felt, was the best approach because on YouTube, other developers will share their screen and they will literally tell you where to click. So I just put the video of the other person's screen. I would have my screen looking exactly the same. and they would move their mouse over one way, move it another way, and I would do the same thing. I had no idea what I was clicking on or what I was typing. But what I did know was at the end of that video, I would click the button and I would see an app that worked exactly like theirs, and that was it. And eventually, through my curiosity, I wanted to change some things. I changed the color of the app or change where a button was. And so I would just Google how to do that one thing. Up until that point, all I knew how to do was change one color and one button position. And other than that, I was blind. And it was fine because that's how coding works incomplete. The biggest myth is that people know how to code. Nobody does. Everybody knows how to Google. And so when you're at a company like Facebook or Google and you look at the people's laptops or their computers, you notice that every engineer has two tabs open. They have their programming window, and then they have a tab with Google open on how to do the thing that they're trying to do. It's always the case. It's always the case. It's fascinating. Oh, you're muted.
I'm muted, sorry. Wow, Laura says YouTube tutorials for the win, but really, what would we do without Google?
I don't know. I mean, it's crazy.
So then moving into writing this book was probably a bit different for you.
Oh,
what was that process like?
oh my gosh, it was crazy. It was so weird, especially doing it, having the book in two languages was pretty crazy. But
Wow.
I thought it was important because, the Hispanic community, a lot of them grow up speaking Spanish and it's easier. So decided to do it in both. And I think the biggest challenge for me was both trying to figure out what was the most important thing to highlight from my story, right? Like there are so many different situations and complications that I got myself into, but as the person living it, I myself didn't know what would be the most useful for other people to know. So I think that was one of the hardest things was just figuring out, what should I include? What is important? A lot of things that I would sometimes think about and try to write down into a chapter realized, oh, well, this isn't that important actually, and I thought it was, or other things that I didn't even think about writing. I then realized, wait a minute, this is actually huge and pivotal, right? And I would ask my friends and coworkers sometimes to just like peer review and take a look at the chapter and tell me their thoughts. And trying to find my voice in writing, I think, was really hard because I think I have one writing style and one speaking style. And I think it was a challenge, but I certainly feel like I nailed it after a few years. It took about three years to write the book. So in through that process, I think it was fascinating to see how it evolved. And naturally, I think when I got to the point of recording the audiobook, that's when things got really crazy. And I spent about a week just trying to like get the emotion of every single chapter and every single process and how things actually went down in the battles within my personal life and the battles within the companies and the meetings and how all of that went down and my struggles with my weight and my struggles with building apps when I was a kid and how I was able to overcome those over time as I started to grow in my career and in my life as a whole. So it was a lot of fun.
I mean, amazing. And, I'm sure you hear this all the time, but I am so proud of you. The memoir by this age, you must know yourself so well. That is
My gosh,
really,
I do not. No, surprisingly, you would think that I know myself so well, but no, no, no.
oh, what a
If anything, I
tremendous
just I
feat.
just begun to understand myself. And I think like as writing this book, I learned so much about myself that I didn't know before.
It's really great. So kind of on your writing process, how did you stay as dedicated as, let's say, your apps? Did you have like a particular time or did you like have to have certain tea or,
Well, I would say it was in a similar way, the amount of focus that I put into pretty much anything is a little bit obsessive. And in the same way, I think with the book, it was certainly the case, where I would spend countless time doing this. If anything, I should have finished the book maybe a year after I started it, but and I took 3 years because part of it was I wanted it to be right. I wanted it to be good and to include as much as I possibly could. And I spent all the time focusing like that. At the same time, I don't know if I don't know if I necessarily try to have a certain routine. I'm a bit of a chaotic person, so my desk looks like a total mess, and my mind is even messier. So I just kind of went all over the place. And I think it was really a challenge for me more than anything else to kind of put everything in the right order. Frankly, I think when I got to that point, it was very clear and things read nicely. But before then, it was definitely a big mix of ideas and kind of like little snippets of stories just from all over the place.
Thanks for sharing that. I can imagine that was a whole lot of work. Um, so what are you working on next? I know you're at Roblox, but where can we find any of your new games, or how do we follow you?
Yeah, so you can find me, I think, on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram at Michael Sayman.
Okay.
Um, and of course, like what I love to do, obviously, is just try and interact with people on the internet and find out, how maybe either I can help them build apps or if they have feedback on my apps. I will post like a link to like a beta version of a game, and then I'll ask people to like tell me like what do they think about it and if they like it or not, and just learn from each other. So naturally, I love doing that. But the other piece to this, I would say, definitely is I I don't know. I hope to make a game that inspires people at one point. I'm still on that hunt. I continuously do it, and there's nothing that gives me more joy in the world than just like see the impact that a game of mine can have on somebody else's life. I think the most exciting thing for me, building apps like Four Snaps and the games that I was building when I was a kid, was that I would uncover sometimes on Twitter, Instagram, that some other kid out there spent maybe 2 minutes of their day laughing and giggling with their friends because they had been playing one of my games together over the internet, and that they had spent that time on my own game to enjoy their life. And it sounds silly. It's like what 2 minutes of their day or something irrelevant, but the fact that there were thousands, tens of thousands of kids out there who spent maybe 2 minutes of their day doing something that brought them happiness through a game that I had just made on my own was like crazy. It's this level of like excitement and joy that I don't even know how to describe, but I chase after obsessively. So that's kind of my hope next, is to see if I can kind of do that again, and see what comes of it.
It's so special to see you even light up when you're talking about it. I can tell so much passion. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us. It has been, I've been receiving so many thank yous. Laura says you bring joy to others, and how great this event was. And yes, this is being recorded. I will be sending everyone an email tomorrow. It will have a link to the recording. It'll have tonight's title, the discount code. I'll include his social media handles and everything you need. So we've got you covered there. And Michael, thank you so much for being with us. We hopefully we'll get you back real soon, or maybe in person.
That would be awesome. Yes, definitely. And thank you so much for having me. I think it's so important that we're able to, highlight independent bookstores and the importance, I think, of keeping that alive and strong, right, throughout the process. So thank you so much for having me. And I'm excited to see if we can see each other in person soon.
Great. Have a nice evening.
Thanks. You too.